Welcome to Coffee with Catholic Workers, a podcast made by and for Catholic workers. I'm Theo.
And I'm Lydia. We've both been a part of the Catholic Worker for the last decade, and we're excited to bring to you conversations with Catholic workers from around the world.
Today we're talking to Mary and Diane from the Winona, Minnesota Catholic Worker. They told us about the ways their community has changed over the years and what it's like running a decentralized house without any live-in Catholic workers.
Now, here's Mary and Diane.
Well, thank you both for joining us today on Coffee with Catholic Workers. Starting off, can you introduce yourself, your name, and how did you find your way to the Catholic worker movement there in Winona?
My name is Mary Farrell, and when I was going to college here in Winona at Winona State University, I got involved at the Newman Center here on campus here at Winona State, and there I met two people. I met Father Dan Corcoran and Sister Monessa. They were on staff. And it was especially Father Dan Corcoran that I found that he lived this simple life, and he also introduced me to the Catholic worker movement at that time. But what I want to say too is that he had his own house right next to the Newman Center. But and all of us students, we would gather at the Newman Center for different events and such. But sometimes we would come to the Newman Center and someone might be sleeping on the couch, or that he let stay there for the night, or he let someone come and gave them food. So he was someone that also was practicing that lifestyle, even though he wasn't officially a Catholic worker, but he was very familiar with Dorothy Day, very familiar with the Catholic worker movement. So that was my very first introduction to the Catholic worker movement, was through the Newman Center, and specifically through Father Dan Corcoran, who we ended up naming our first house after. And then when I graduated from Winona State, I decided I wanted to go volunteer at a Catholic worker house. And a friend of mine actually took 9 months off of school and went to the Casa Maria in Milwaukee, and she had come back to the Newman Center and gave a talk about that. So it was a combination of her experience in Milwaukee, knowing Father Dan. And so, when I graduated in 1981 from Winona State, I had found out that in Dubuque, Iowa, all the women that were live-in volunteers were moving out, and they really needed help. So I moved to Dubuque, Iowa that summer, and myself and another woman that was from Waterloo also moved there, and we spent the summer there at the Dubuque Catholic Worker. And then that was just, did the summer and thought, okay, that's fine, done, over with, and then I left and then moved back to Minnesota. And then my friend Rose, who was with me in Dubuque, but moved back to Waterloo, she called me some months later and said, Mary, we're going to start a Catholic worker in Waterloo. How do you feel about coming out to help out for a couple weeks? And I said, okay. I was in the middle of, I was back home with my parents and looking for work. And so anyway, I said, yes, I'll be glad to do that. So I came, 2 weeks turned into 2 years. So I was at the Waterloo Catholic Worker for 2 years. And then again, came back to Minnesota once again. And I don't know how much we want to keep going with this, but I can, come back to Minnesota. I, working this job and that, odd jobs kind of thing. But I have this sort of desire that I'm also a photographer. And so I thought about going to different Catholic worker communities and doing a photo project. So I reached out to Catholic worker communities around the United States. And I said, I'm interested in traveling and coming to your community. And at that time, I had asked them about photographing guests living at a Catholic worker. Well, I got complete rejection on that idea. So then I thought, okay. So I started from scratch again. I rewrote everybody. I said, how about I come and photograph the volunteers? And I got, yeah, you know, they were all very open to that. So 1989, 1990, I took, as I call it, a photo pilgrimage around the United States. And I traveled to 25 communities with my camera. And I photographed the volunteers and workers throughout. So I went all the way to, I went out, started out in Colorado, went out to the West Coast, down to the Southwest, up into the Midwest, and all the way out to through Chicago, Cleveland, and the East Coast, and finished, I think, out in, I think New York. New York might have been my final stop. I can't remember. So that was for a year that I went on that pilgrimage. And then during that pilgrimage, I had met Dorothy Gauchat in Ohio, where she was running a house providing hospitality for children with AIDS. And she told me at that time, she said, you know, if you're out on, you know, out on the East Coast, we have a summer kind of cottage in Newport, Rhode Island, but in order to stay there, if you want to, you will need to talk to Ade Bethune. Ade Bethune has a key to my place. So when I went, after my stay in New York, I go to Newport and I get in touch with Ade. And she gives me, the, you know, we have dinner and all of that. And then she tells me about this project she's working on. And she needed a photographer. And I said, well, and was I interested? And I said, well, not right now. I'm in the middle of this other project. So then I finished my pilgrimage. I come back to Minnesota. My mother is in the middle of some cancer treatments. I'm helping out with my parents. But then my mother improves. And then I'm thinking about Ade. So then I get in touch with Ade. I said, are you still interested in this project? I'm kind of, you know, free right now. Yes. So I moved out to Newport and I lived with Ade for 6 months and did a, worked on this project. She was cataloging Christian art. So I was photographing kind of artwork out of the books, but she also had a dark room. So I was working on my photos that I took and used her dark room. And then during that time, the Boston was going to host the National Gathering of Catholic Workers. This was like 1990 now, or 1991 by this time, something like that. And would I like to exhibit? So then I exhibited the photos at the National Gathering. And anyway, after this time, I thought, well, where am I at with everything? Because this is also a time of discernment. Do I want to join a Catholic worker community that I visited? Or do I want to go back to Minnesota? But I had some really good friends in Winona that were, you know, just kind of, they just had an empty nest. Their adult children had moved out. And they said, Mary, if you come back to Winona, we will help you start a Catholic worker here. I said, I moved back to Winona and I lived with Barbara and Jim in their home in 9 months. And as Barbara would call it, the gestation period. So we built this community. We had a wider community coming over and having meetings and potlucks and such. And then eventually we officially opened our Catholic worker, Winona Catholic Worker, Dan Corcoran House in 92. July of 92. So that's kind of a long story, but that's how it kind of, how I got started. So, and then I moved into the Catholic worker and then eventually more people moved in. So, yeah.
I guess I'll take it from there, being that I'm the other one here. I'm Diane Lutgeb Munson, and I was born the year Mary graduated college and started much of that adventure. and I was 11 when they opened the Winona Catholic Worker. But this year I'll have been a part of the community for 20 years. So I joined the Winona Catholic Worker straight out of college and haven't made it very far since then as a Catholic worker anyways.
Well, and you went to college here. She got
Yes.
involved when she was a student at St. Mary's.
Yeah, my Catholic social teaching professor was a Christian brother who was living at the Catholic Worker. So my freshman year of college, one of my teachers was also a live-in volunteer at the Catholic Worker and encouraged everyone from the class to come down for dinner. I was the only one from the class that came down for dinner and kept coming down for dinner. So here I am 20 years later, still coming down for dinner. But now I live a lot closer, just around the corner from our house. But yeah, I moved into the house the year after Mary had moved out, I believe. It wasn't too much.
So no, were we
overlap.
talking, you moved into Dan Corcoran House?
Yeah, for a brief time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So because we started the Dan Corcoran House and named it after this priest. And then 4 years into it, we started our second house for single men. And that was Bethany House.
Mhm. Yeah, which, do you want to switch gears? That's our intro story.
Yeah, that's all really great. Thanks for introducing yourselves like that. Yeah, why don't you talk a little bit about what the Winona Catholic Workers work looks like, and has it changed? How has it changed since Diane was 11 and Mary was starting the house?
Yeah, so when they opened, as Mary said, the Dan Corcoran House for Women and Families, it was originally for everyone, and they realized pretty quickly that that wasn't actually a great idea. So they decided to get a second house specifically for single men, kind of sort things out a little bit there. So for a long time, from 1996 until 2000 something, we ran both houses. And over the years, as happens in many places, depending on who was around and how many live-ins we had, we did different things out of both houses. But traditionally, we had women and families in the Dan Corcoran House, single men housed in the Bethany House, and an open meal 5 nights a week, also out of the Bethany House. But I would say about 10 years ago, the community started shifting in that it was harder and harder to find live-ins especially to run both houses. There was kind of a height around the time that I joined the community where we had 8 live-in volunteers, and from there it went down to 6 and 4, 2. And so some time ago, we started realizing that that didn't seem to be a tenable long-term option, certainly for us, but also that people weren't ready to give it up. None of us that were really compelled by the work were interested or able to move into the house. And yet there were many, many of us still compelled by the work. So at some point a number of years ago, I think it's maybe 5 years ago now, we decided to experiment with whether we could run the house sustainably without anyone living in it. Primarily using community volunteers, largely people that lived within a mile of the house. And although, like everything at the Worker, it's a consistent experiment, there isn't an end game in this one. It has been surprising how much more stable things have felt because of this model than when we had a live-in coming for a year and another live-in coming for a year and a half, and 3 live-in volunteers that were tasked with kind of dealing with the hardest of the work, and then other people coming in and bringing dinner. Everything feels a little better spread out at this point, and we probably have, I don't know, 6, 8 households that are consistently supporting the work in a weekly fashion in one way or another. In addition to dozens and dozens of other households that are supporting the work in smaller ways. And at this point, I mean, we just last month expanded our hours and our offerings because we have more volunteers than we had shifts to fill. So it's been a surprising and rocky transition. But I think all in all, it's been really interesting to see that. I think the the best part of the Catholic Worker is that there isn't one way to do it, but it's really hard to break out of the way that you have been doing it. And that was certainly challenging for us to push ourselves in that direction and to feel the pushback from others when it didn't feel like that's how we used to do it. But all of that experimentation and challenge has yielded a lot of growth and a lot of, in some ways, a lot of giving up and a lot of letting go of how it used to be. But that's life. It's like always how we are, right? We're not the same as last year, and we as a community aren't the same as last year or the year before. So it feels like we're sitting in a good place, but that's today.
Do you want to talk about just running one house versus the closing?
Right. In the midst of that, thank you, Mary.
Yeah.
In the midst of that transition, we realized we really took stock of our resources and whether or not this was tenable. And the main outcome of that was that we sold one of our 2 houses. So we downsized substantially as a community based on our financial resources and then also our personal resources and just the maintenance of 200-year-old plus houses that we weren't using to full capacity was the first obvious decision. And we were very grateful to be able to set up a contract for deed with another local organization that at the point that they bought the house wanted to do housing for women and families. They've changed their work a bit and they're doing childcare out of that house at this point, but essentially it has a very similar use to what we had used it for. And that transition went very, very smoothly and felt like absolutely the right thing. But was, again, the first of many letting goes in that was the Dan Corcoran house that Mary moved into and lived in for 10 years. And it felt a bit like cutting off our right arm and then choosing to carry on. But we still live on the block with that beautiful house, and it is a part of our history in a big way. So they didn't burn it down, which is great. It's still there. It's beautiful. It's better than ever, actually. They're really taking care of it.
Yeah, because they're just, 6 houses apart?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the work that the Winona Catholic Worker currently does?
We are open 5 days a week at this point for drop-in hospitality. This was another shift in recent years. We used to only offer dinner, and we recalibrated based on what our volunteers' schedules looked like and what we were feeling called to do. So now we offer breakfast 3 days a week for the first time ever in our history, and the breakfast is made to order. So a lot of our guests remark that it's like the best restaurant in town because they come in and put in an order, and if we have it, we cook it. Sometimes it's a little over the top, so you can only get so many sausage, but it is. So breakfast made to order 3 days a week. We do a family style dinner on Thursday nights, and then Saturday afternoon we serve lunch. So there's always a food option, often kind of catered to the person. And then in addition, we have the traditional setup where we have laundry in the basement people can use and accessible shower, as well as people can receive their laundry, make phone calls. There's gallons and gallons of coffee, the things that we all do. They're on our list too, but yeah, we certainly, and I would say a lot of what we didn't talk about is that Winona is a town of 27,000. So a small Midwestern town. And many of our guests are people that have lived in this town as long as we have. So a lot of the folks that are using our house, or the core group of people that are using our house, are often pretty stably housed folks that maybe live alone, don't have a lot of other social outlets, and tend to feel at home in our space. Maybe all those things I'm also stably housed and always could use more social outlets. So I think I fit the bill of our typical, the folks we're catering to include myself and many of the folks that join us for breakfast. In addition, of course, there are always folks that are unhoused and often folks that are transient, moving through town from one place to the next, that have long used our houses as well. But I would say that kind of the core group of folks are people that we've often known for a lot of the time that we've lived on the block. So,
and Winona does have quite a few resources, in terms of Catholic Charities runs an overnight warming center just through the cold months. And then there's a day center that they run. And then we have a local, volunteer services that provides food and some money or vouchers for overnight housing. So we can plug into some of the other resources as well.
Yeah, we certainly consider ourselves to be like the living room spot. And that's generally how people regard us, that it's a place to come in and just be and have a conversation. We have some beautiful outdoor spaces that with the sale of our second house, we have basically decided to funnel the small amount of money that came from that sale into repairs and upgrades to our space to prioritize the physical space that we're able to offer, since that's our main offering. So the interior of our house is absolutely stunning. We have some members of our community that are very gifted in interior design, which is not necessarily all of our gifts. So thank goodness for that. It's beautiful and bright.
We probably should have. We're in my house right now. But we probably should have done this at Bethany so you could see it.
Yeah, we could have toured.
Yeah.
It is lovely, though. I mean, it is a very lovely.
And Theo, you've been here, I know, right?
Lydia has too, I think.
And Lydia too? Have you been to Bethany?
I came out when Faith and Resistance was out there. I don't know what the timing was on that. I don't remember what year it was.
Yeah, that was before our big makeover, actually. So you should all come back. Anyone who's listening to this should come through for a visit. It's beautiful. It's lovely. You can't say we don't have any beds, but all kinds of people in the neighborhood do. So.
So it is a little different to have a worker where there aren't any live-in workers. Like how did that, especially because it was open for such a long time, how did that impact you all and sort of how you view yourselves as Catholic workers and what it means to be a Catholic worker?
Yeah, there was no shortage of identity crisis. That's for sure.
Yeah, it certainly was odd. It was difficult to just think about, many of us were, had our own jobs and we had our own places to live and we were supporting the people, who were living in the house, and then to just all of a sudden nobody living in the house and we're all separated. It felt a little un-Catholic workerish, but we've made it work, I think. It has its ups and downs, I think.
Yeah, and I do think, in this moment specifically, we're in the midst of a minor or significant house crisis, in that we closed hospitality suddenly the other day, based on some goings on with some of our guests. And I think Mary alluded basically to what we've been feeling, which is that the community part of our work is maybe the piece that comes last now when it used to come first. And it's also the piece that makes the work worth doing a lot of the time, that you feel so connected and supported in the work. And now, because of the way we're modeled, a lot of that community communication happens in a notebook in the kitchen or via email in order to make sure everyone's up to speed on what's happening and that we're making a way forward. But, the seeing each other over breakfast in the morning and rehashing what happened last night and deciding what it is the next best step is a distant memory for us.
Yeah.
And so all that to say, I was at the house this morning and Mary and Eileen Hansen were there, had just had prayer and were having breakfast. Although we had to suddenly close the house this week, there we were having breakfast together. It does still happen. It's just feels a little less tight-knit than it maybe once was.
Well, just a little bit, thinking about we're being in this sort of crisis right now with what happened in the last couple of days. What we discovered too is, not having someone living at the house. And what happened is some guests kind of showed up at the house and we were hanging out on the porch and being loud and not very appropriate, I think. And so the neighbors started to reach out and contact us and say, you know what, you need to take care of this. So that's what we've had to encounter kind of with someone not actually being there 24/7. So that comes with it.
Yeah, which is also not all downside. I would say I was there when we made the decision to close the house this week, and I thought, wow, what a beautiful thing to be able to go home and to not let this eat me alive for the next days and days. And either way, I was going to be rehashing the decisions we made and what I said and what I didn't say. And I thought, what a nice thing I lived in the house for 5 years. And so I spent many, many days doing that same work while also still being in the house. And it does feel like having the ability to really step out of it can change your relationship with it for the better as well. And that's not at all I think any way that you do this work is a beautiful way to do this work. I just think I'm noticing how many more people in our lives are willing to engage with it at a deeper level because it's accessible in a different way. And as a live-in volunteer, it felt very much like an exclusive club. And more often than not, you would hear, what a great thing you're doing.
Oh.
And now we hear more and more, how is it that I might try that in a small way, in a big way with my friend? We have some people that come and volunteer only when we're not open, but it means that they're cleaning the house when no one's there. And that means that they're in the house when they might not have been otherwise. So I feel like for all of the drawbacks, there's just as many advantages and just as many doors that have opened that weren't there before. And especially being so rooted. I think Mary and I top the list of people that are madly in love with Winona. And this has been such an amazing experience to make this so Winona-centric. When I moved into the house with 5 other brand new live-in volunteers, none of us were from here. I was the one that had lived here longest and had gone to college here, but spent half of my college studying abroad. Everyone else was brand new from a different place, a different city, and now everyone who comes to invest their time and energy in the house is of this place and is staying in this place and has something very different to offer in that way. So yeah. So that's my plug.
Well, in some way, it shifts it from it just being sort of held by like these select few and makes it so the movement is much more accessible to many people, which I think is a unique thing of if we're trying to build a movement, it has to be something that is broad. And I don't think living in a Catholic worker is really a great fit for I was going to say most people, and I don't know if that's true, but it probably isn't a good fit for most people. And so if we're honest about that, then what does it mean to try to be talking about Catholic worker values if we don't actually think that most people should move into a house?
Yeah, we had just a couple of weeks ago, Mary helped to put together a celebration, not only for the 91st anniversary of the Catholic Worker, but also the 32nd anniversary of our house. And I bet we had 50 people or more in the house. And what really struck me was that I was having conversations with some people that had helped start the house in 1992. And half of those people have been at the house fairly often since, and some of them hadn't been there in years. And I also talked to people that night that was their very first time in the house. And I was just stunned by how broad the thing is in this moment. And also recall, the moments as a live-in volunteer where I thought, why won't anyone help us? and now I feel like every time I turn around, somebody wants to take something off my plate, or is anyone taking care of the lawn mowing? Because I know someone that would love to take care of the lawn mowing. It's kind of spectacular to see the reach, I think, at this point. And also, I think it's no small secret that Mary Frill is pretty incredible. And so seems to be a bit of a magnet. And people do actually, it was spectacular to see the response to this celebration and the joy of people that have raised their families, in and around this house. And in this case too, to have mass in the house, which we haven't done in a long time, really kind of reignited the connection of our house with the Catholic community and the faith community, which hasn't always been strong. And that I may have played a significant role in that tenuous relationship, in that I'm not Catholic. But really pretty astounding to see kind of the number of rebirths along the way, and where we are now feels pretty good.
So Diane downplays her magnetism, but so I, just want to say that, I lived in the Catholic work, helped start the house with my friends, the Allairs, and of course the wider group. And then I lived in the house for 10 years, but, and then went on a sabbatical when my father was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, and came back after a year and decided to not move back into the house. But anyway, Diane and Mike have played just a major role of really keeping our houses and now our one house open. They are really very much, I guess I know I'm not supposed to say this, but they're in charge.
You are not supposed to say that.
They really are. They are central. They are core. They are showing up when, anything needs to be done. They're organizing, things that are, that are happening at the house. Well, most of us are involved, but they are big time.
We're
involved.
huge.
Yeah, they're huge. Yeah, no, really, that's, without them, I'm not sure. I'd be very concerned what would happen. So,
Well, so
make sure that gets in there.
yeah, you can feel free to edit that part out if you want, but I will say, yes, Mike and I have been consistently involved for the last number of decades now. But there have been, I feel like the reason that is true now is that, especially during the pandemic years, which were brutal for everybody, but particularly brutal if you were trying to run a Catholic worker and make decisions as a community with a diverse group of people who believe strongly in anarchism. That held some challenges on our end for sure. And certainly I came to and surpassed the breaking point in my capacity to keep it together for everybody else's sake. And the reason that I think Mike and I are still around is that the one success that's most obvious in our community is our community. And that when things really get real, it's never actually that we're in charge. And I think that was more obvious than ever when I felt like there was nothing I could do to keep it together. And people came out of the woodwork to say, okay, we'll take a break and we'll keep it together. We got it. And that's happened time and time again. We also had a significant tragedy in our community a number of years ago. We lost a guest to suicide. And the same thing happened, but on a much wider scale, in that other Catholic workers came from other houses to pick up the mantle and take on the work. And we were as broken as people can be. I mean, it was the deepest kind of darkness. And we just made some phone calls and they showed up. And, there was so little they could actually do. And just the reality that they were there was what we needed to keep going. And so that sentiment, both within the wider community and within the Winona community, has certainly been the fuel behind our longevity, I would say, in that it never feels like, well, if Mike and I don't do it, it just won't happen. That's never been true. And so I think if it were true, it wouldn't be happening, because it's too much for 2 people. It's too much for 3 people. It's really too much. It's a lot. But when there's so many people willing to partake, it doesn't ever feel, we just had a meeting last week and I was like, the Catholic worker is functioning best when everyone feels like they're not really doing anything. And someone else was like, or it's not functioning at all and nothing's actually happening. But in our case, I think we're actually on the good end of that, where nobody feels like they're doing too much, because we're all doing the things that we can handle. All I have to say, Mary and I love each other a lot.
I don't feel that way.
Yeah. Yeah, we're very blessed for sure. For sure.
I just wanted to also put a plug for Sugar Creek. So I've been going to Sugar Creek since I was at the Waterloo Catholic Worker. I might possibly hold the record for having attended the most gatherings consecutively from actually when I started the Winona Catholic Worker until from 91, I think, to 2021. And then I got married in 2022, and right around the weekend when the Sugar Creek was, so I missed that one, but I was there last year. Anyway, I have to put that in there. But I will say that attending Sugar Creek, as a Catholic worker from the Midwest has been really wonderful to, build those relationships and be a part of that wonderful weekend in the middle of, I love the ambiance. I love being in the middle of the farm landscape and just us, just kind of, and the school, former school and retreat center, and that wonderful big kitchen, and we're all gathered together in spirit and in body, and just sharing kind of that vision together away from our houses. And so I think that is, for me, has fed me too. And when you say people came during the pandemic, I think that was because we know these folks from that gathering. And well, actually, Mike and Diane, when they travel and go, when Mike's playing music, they stay at a lot of Catholic worker houses too. But anyway, I'm a big fan of Sugar Creek. Just gonna plug that.
Yeah, Sugar Creek. Everyone should come. I don't know if Lydia has any other questions.
I'd actually be curious if what your thoughts are on, like, why was there a decline in live-in volunteers, where you sort of had like a boom and bust. I think it's something we see in a lot of Catholic workers, and maybe then to go along with that, of like, what was the decline in live-in volunteers, but then also, why do you think you were able to be so successful in building up this larger community? What were some of the key things that built that larger community?
That's a good question. We had talked a lot about the live-in volunteer conundrum, and recognized a couple key factors. Almost all of our live-in volunteers had, for the recent past at this point, had been recent college graduates. And as college debt loads grew and our offerings stayed the same, as in we offer room and board and 24 hours of work every day, we found that we weren't really an appealing option for people with a lot of college debt. And not that people weren't impassioned to do the work, but I think there's so many other outlets where they could also take care of their debt and get health insurance, which we were not offering. That seemed to be a factor. Yeah, and it's so hard to know, I think, but looking at the volunteers that we had kind of that had come to us previous, a lot of those pieces of the puzzle seemed obvious. That
because did everybody kind of move out all at the same time? Did that kind of happen?
It was a
and
trickle.
Okay.
Claire
Okay.
was the last. Yeah. And it was actually Rachel Stahl that said, we're not closing the house because the last live-in moved out. We said, okay, what are we doing? Yeah, but I think that I would say at the point when we decided we're going to try it without live-ins, we had one of the beautiful pieces in Winona is that there are so many former live-in volunteers that live in Winona. So we started there with folks that knew the work so intimately that we called on them first to take shifts and be involved. It turns out most of them are not super jazzed about that at this moment in time, mostly because they all have small children and jobs and live in the country. And so they're, but they were definitely part of our kind of stability in that as other people were coming in. I think the biggest piece of building a volunteer base was maintaining the feeling of the house, the tone of the house, and the core of the work. And so we didn't want to become a drop-in center. We want to be a Catholic worker. And to make it clear how that's different, you can't like just give people readings to do. You have to be there modeling what that looks like, which is how we always brought live-ins into the mix. It was like, you're going to live here 24/7, see how we do this and how we don't do it. And then if it works for you, you can hang out for longer. And in some ways, we still do that with volunteers. So anyone that wants to volunteer at the house, we have kind of a similar line, which is, please come to some of our meals. You can't take a shift until you've come to the house and experienced it. And if it feels like a place you want to be, then we'll continue a conversation on how you might plug in. But the most important part is for you to come and see that this is a space you want to be in, and to recognize that you're not coming to offer some services. Like, we're all coming here in a certain spirit. And if you can embody that and embrace that and realize, that we're all coming here with things that we lack, and we're all coming here with things to offer, then we can proceed. We've never been great with volunteers that want to come in and serve on a soup line, because our house just doesn't run that way. So I think that's been part of the seamlessness, is that we've always had enough people around to continue that kind of covert training. Because we also don't offer any volunteer training ever. It feels like you just have to come and learn the ropes, which is why the serving spoons are always in a different drawer every single day. But I think that was kind of one of the, and continues to be one of the marks of that. And also that, much as we joke about it, Mike and I aren't there all that much. And so if you have a question, there isn't a boss. And that becomes clear pretty quickly, which is, if you can roll with that, then you can keep volunteering. But if that becomes difficult for you, it becomes clear that it's not a great fit. So it's a much more low-key system of bringing in new people than we used to have when we had intake questions and interviews and trial periods. And now it's like, can you hang? And it turns out a lot of people can. So lucky for us.
Yeah, I think to keep the house going and sustaining it, this was how we were going to need to transition into this model. Because we were just struggling with being able to find more people wanting to live in and live that lifestyle. And even so, I mean, I'm not sure, but to this day, if we get inquiries, I'm not even sure if that happens. Or do you?
Very infrequent.
Yeah.
And many of the inquiries we've received are from folks that are also in need of housing, that are offering to do the live-in work. So it's rare, certainly.
Yeah.
But that could change. We could change. All things are possible, as we've witnessed.
Well, and I see some of these new communities starting, and it seems like there's a mix of people that are either, starting, living in community, doing the work, or somewhat of our model too, people in the neighborhood coming together and helping out at a household or community.
Thanks for asking.
Yeah.
It feels really fun to talk about it, because, it's kind of a big deal, I guess. Mostly it feels like a big deal that we've hung in there this long, because I think most Catholic workers know how tenuous it feels on the regular, even if, our bank account is more robust and steadier than it's ever been, and our house is in better shape. And it still can feel like, I don't know, will we be here next month? And even, we talk all this, it's great. We have a beautiful, vibrant community, but, we're not Catholic Charities. So we're standing on different grounds, and we feel really proud that we've made it to this point, and really proud of what we're able to do. And also it's hard to talk about the whole of it without letting people in on how scrappy we are, which is pretty scrappy. Somebody at the bank actually just offered us, our credit union that we bank at just offered us a $10,000 grant if we were a 501c3.
Oh, really?
And so I got to have the conversation with our bank lady about why we're not a 501c3. And I was like, oh, here we go. But we're not, and we're not taking the money. So we'll keep on keeping on with the $25 checks. That's just fine. It's gotten us this far. Let's
Did she
keep going.
did she then look at your accounts and be like, "Oh, this makes so much more sense now of why it runs so low"?
Mostly she looked at me and she was like, of course. Yeah, of course it's about a principle, huh? Yeah, sure. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, checked out. No surprise. Do you ever get asked questions?
Theo and I have interviewed each other.
Mhm.
It might be fun to do an episode where people can write in and ask me and Lydia a question and we answer it.
Well, Theo, I have to just, I mean, you're in the middle of starting a Catholic Worker in St. Louis, right?
That's right. Yep. I am sitting in the newly purchased St. Louis Catholic Worker house right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
Which looks oddly like a Zoom background.
And Lydia, you're in,
I'm at Emmaus House in Chicago.
yeah, okay. So both of those are live-in volunteer houses that you're part, yeah.
So don't take anything personally that we said about how it's not tenable. That's not what we meant. We didn't mean it about you. It was about us.
You know, though, it is a something where it's like every year we're like, oh yeah, we'll probably be around in another year or two, probably 3. After that, you know, toss a coin. Who knows?
Yeah. I visited the Catholic Workers in Europe last summer, and I think about a lot. In Paris, they have like a cafe. They don't have like a community house. They have like a space. And I was talking to one of the longtime folks there, and she was like, "Yeah, we've talked about doing like a house of hospitality, living communally." And she said, "But I gotta ask, do people really like living with each other?" And I thought it was really funny, but I also tried to like answer very seriously that it is like difficult and we try and be better at it, but like sometimes we do and sometimes we don't, I guess.
Well, it's interesting now, yeah, Theo, that you are, after all your travels, you've made the decision to be in St. Louis. Now we're interviewing you.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say. Yeah, I mean, my family is here. I kind of never thought I'd be back in St. Louis, but here we are, starting a new house.
Sure. Well, good luck with that.
Yeah. Yeah. And thank you both for this work that you do that connects other people to the Catholic Worker. Even though some of us don't consume podcasts, we appreciate that they exist for those who do, because it's important. And I value that there's other access points to this movement, which is very robust. So thanks for doing this work.
No problem. It's a lot of fun for us.
Well, that was fun talking to the two of them. It's always interesting to hear how the different houses are different from each other. But today we got to hear about how the Winona Catholic Worker is different from the Winona Catholic Worker of 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I've heard it said around the Catholic Worker movement before, if you want to see 30 different communities, you can go visit 30 different houses, or you can just stay at one house for 30 years. And it sounds like that's a true statement for Winona.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's probably a piece of it that Winona would not have been around for all of these decades, it sounds like, if it hadn't adapted into these many iterations of itself.
Yeah, and one thing that really stuck out with me that Diane said was just that, like, it's kind of like life. We aren't the same person we were 10 years ago, and the community is not the same entity it was 10 years ago. And it's just always growing and changing and adaptable like that. It's a beautiful thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel like there sometimes are many Catholic workers that struggle after the founding group of whoever starts and has an initial vision leaves, and that it's really can be like a point of crisis for houses to then determine of, okay, what's sort of like the new vision, what's the new and yet very old way of doing things, or how does the old values become lived out in a new way?
Yeah, and yeah, many places have that anchor for many years. We've seen that as a model. There's been at times a little bit of a joke around the Midwest Catholic worker scene. I feel like that you might show up at a house and after a month you'll be the only one running it. And Diane alluded to that a little bit, not quite extreme, but it was interesting to hear that she said that in a interesting way they've had like more continuity since they've changed to this model. Instead of just having 1, 2, 3 people who come for 1, 2, 3 years, they've been able to keep this core group of about 6 or 8 households, she said, really involved on a continual basis. So that's neat.
Yeah. I think there's other workers who are able to hold like a wide view of community. I'm thinking of like our own house and the ways that we've talked sometimes about how it would be nice to have sort of more of an extended community that's more involved. I feel like we have a good extended community that comes and does things, but isn't necessarily a part of like the integral decision-making process or like the vision or steering of things. And so I think that is a special thing to be able to have that held by a broad number of people, because in a way it really is, I suppose, a testimony of the value that people have of the worker there and of its mission and sort of the like the Catholic worker ideal in general.
Yeah, and I mean it's great they were able to figure that out, that they weren't just like stuck in like the quote unquote this is how it's done, that they were able to like step back and be like, we're going to try this different thing, even though it has looked different. And it's interesting too, just looking at all the different ways of doing it in the movie or in the movement. Last week when we were talking about loaves and fishes in Duluth, they were able to find continuity with like a group of people who have been there for a long time, and that is what worked for them. And now Winona has been able to find continuity kind of in the exact opposite model of not having any long-term live-in volunteers. And they both seem to be working, so that's beautiful.
Yeah. Kind of some of the beauty of being able to speak to all these different houses and see what's working for different folks.
Yeah. And to your point earlier too, I was just thinking a little bit about, Mary joked about, oh, Mike and Diane are the boss kind of sort of thing. And Diane was saying, no, that's not really true. I mean, when you have that decentralized model, there is not like that temptation to just put everything on the couple of people in the house. It's like, who's going to make the decisions? Well, obviously it'll be those 2 people who live there.
I would say theoretically, in a healthy, functioning, decentralized society, it wouldn't all fall on a couple of people.
Yeah, good framing there. So yeah, but it is at least less of a temptation when it's like, this is the person who lives there. That's obviously the person in charge just because of like physical proximity to the place or something like that.
Sure, yeah. All right, well, this wraps up another episode for us for Coffee with Catholic Workers. There was another plug in this episode, similar to the one previous, for Sugar Creek. For people who don't know, Sugar Creek is the annual gathering of Midwest Catholic workers at a small retreat center in Iowa. So if you're interested in that, there is information that comes out on Catholic Worker email threads, or you can reach out to us at coffeewithcatholicworkers@gmail.com. if you are interested in Sugar Creek this year. Or you can feel free to reach out to us with other comments, suggestions, questions, clarification of thought. We want to thank Chris from the Bloomington Catholic Worker for helping us out in editing audio, David Hayes for our music, and Becky McIntyre for our graphic.
Thanks for joining us again for some clarification of thought. We hope today's discussion has been enlightening, and maybe even that you're encouraged to go out and help build a world where it's easier to be good.